Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of X's and O's, brought to you by Herd & Horns. We're broadcasting you live from Herd & Horns. I am Jay Lennander.
And I'm Eric Bunnell.
And we're going to have a broadcast to you all about the NCAA tournament up through the Sweet 16 here today. So a whole bunch of crazy things have been going on, a lot of last-second shots, a whole bunch of upsets. The South and the West divisions have been completely obliterated in terms of the top-seeded teams. What have been your initial thoughts about how volatile this year has been?
Well, to me, first off, I think the 16 seeds, I think they could have been higher up because those 16 seeds in UMBC obviously knocking off Virginia. So now we can't even say it's impossible for 16 seed because now they're 1 in 135 and they're up and they obliterated Virginia, top defensive team, by 20. I mean, there's not much you can do about that, but hopefully the NCAA learns from this because UMBC had like 25, 26 wins coming into the tournament. I think they should have been a little higher, but Virginia just had a bad game, and we all knew that was coming, but we just didn't know when.
Mm-hmm. And another team within that region that had a big upset loss in the first game was Arizona losing to Buffalo. Now, Arizona was really the team that, over Virginia, people from that region were thinking was going to potentially make it to the Final Four. They've got the very likely consensus number 1 overall pick in DeAndre Ayton. But, of course, they lost early as well, and we kind of saw that throughout the bracket. What about Arizona sort of left you disappointed within there?
The fact that their team didn't even come to play. They took it like it was just a lightweight, like catwalk game, or it was just like taking on like a Rutgers team that's real bad, not very good. I mean, they just thought it was going to be a cakewalk into the next round, and DeAndre Ayton being one of the 15 semifinalists for the Wooden Award, I think he's out of the running now. I think it's done. If you're in consideration for the Player of the Year, you don't let your team get beat by 20, especially to a team like that. But coming from Buffalo, I mean, their motto going in was, "We're not the underdogs. We're not the underdogs," and they kept believing in that, and they took it to Arizona, and Arizona just didn't come to play. And could it be the FBI thing that had a little bit to do with it? We don't know. We won't know because players won't admit that. But who knows? I mean, I think that's just underperformance by Arizona.
Mm-hmm. And another team that really came out and surprised, because one thing that is in common between those two games are that these were not just last-second wins from these lower-seeded teams. These were wins by 10 or 20-point margins. And another team that more recently faced a 20-point margin in that division was Nevada when they were up against Cincinnati. They were down by 20 points, and they came all the way back to win in the final minutes. What about sort of these differences between teams coming up and all of these very games that are either coming down to the last second, these last second shots, or games that are going to be 20-point margins? What have been sort of the differences between those games, and do you think that we'll continue to see this trend in this NCAA tournament of games that are either super wide margins or so close that it comes down to the final second?
I think you're going to start to see it a little bit more because these younger schools, these mid-major schools like Nevada, like Loyola Chicago, like UMBC, like Buffalo, they all have they're all senior top-heavy classes where in the era of the one-and-done, you have Arizona, a lot of the one-and-done players. Virginia, not necessarily, but they had a pretty stellar defensive team, but some guys could be one-and-done if they really wanted to. As far as Cincinnati, I don't think anybody on that team would be one-and-done, but Nevada, they have that cohesiveness together. That's what it takes to win in the NCAA tournament, and it's March. You're going to have madness no matter where you go on to play.
And there's going to be plenty of madness coming up here on X's and O's as we're going to shift from the South region, from the West region into the South when we come back.
Welcome back, everybody. We're now here to talk about the West region, where it's not as chaotic as the South region was. But Jay, what did you see from the West region, and what did you learn about how tough the March Madness is this year?
Well, I think we realized that, at least within this region, that some of the predictions going in were right, as we've seen Gonzaga really come out as a dominant force within this division. People were saying that they were underrated as a 4 seed, and we've definitely seen that come to fruition with the 1 seed, Xavier, losing to Florida State, whereas Gonzaga is still rolling strong moving into the Sweet 16. So I think really with this division, it was almost as chaotic as the one we were talking about previously, but it was because it also had the 1 and the 2 seeds losing, with Xavier and North Carolina going down. However, unlike the West, what happened is that it's not that Arizona is going to be continuing, but Gonzaga is. So there still is that sort of underdog favorite that was coming in, and they're still sitting around there. So moving forward, comparing these two divisions, Gonzaga is still sort of the big dog that's still sitting in that division, and people thought it was going to be that way. And personally, within my brackets, Gonzaga was a team that I had heavily favored, I think making it to the Final Four in even one of my brackets. And so they're a team that's still there, and unlike the craziness that is the West, there is a team that is established and is probably going to be a favorite moving forward.
I mean, to me, Xavier, the Big East champs, getting knocked out. North Carolina, last year's tournament champions, getting knocked out early on. And they didn't just get beat by a last-second shot. They got hammered by Texas A&M in the state of North Carolina. Roy Williams' largest loss in the NCAA tournament. But a team that's a dark horse now in that bracket, Michigan. I know they're a 3 seed, but they've been playing some pretty good ball lately. They got Houston gave them a run for their money with Rob Gray. He put up, I believe it was almost 70 points in his first 2 games of the NCAA tournament. Only Steph Curry had more than him, but I don't know. It's going to be exciting to see this Sweet 16 start off. Who is your pick in this bracket to move on to the Final Four?
I mean, of course, we've seen some good performances from Michigan, but that's not necessarily a team that's been able to fight when it comes to these big game situations. We've seen them have good seasons in these past couple of years, but they've never been able to get it done. I think Gonzaga has gotten farther and has more experience within this division, and I think Gonzaga is really going to be the team to watch out for. However, this has been a tournament where there's no guarantees. So I think if anyone takes out Gonzaga, it's probably not going to be Michigan. It's going to be one of these other random teams, like potentially Texas A&M, who beat North Carolina. It's going to be one of these other teams that sort of takes them out unexpectedly, rather than them drawing all the way to the end and having a big matchup with, say, Michigan or whatever other team is left.
See, I think this whole bracket right now with Florida State, East Coast, Texas A&M, Midwest region, Midwest area, Michigan, Midwest area, Gonzaga, West Coast. They don't got to travel very far to get where they're going to play. So I think jet lag may play a little bit of fatigue, but who knows? I don't see Gonzaga getting out of it. I can see Florida State even pulling the upset. They played a tough ACC conference with Duke, Virginia, Louisville. I know they didn't make the tournament. Notre Dame, North Carolina, Syracuse, who's still in it. We'll get them in a little bit later. But I think if it was Gonzaga or those other 3 teams, I think I got to take those other 3 teams with the chance to get out of that bracket, that side of the bracket, and move on to the Final Four in San Antonio.
Yeah, and I think Gonzaga, the reason that they're going to be the team to beat is that they've faced disappointment over and over and over again in the past couple teams. Going from the favorite to the bottom, they're used to disappointment, so they're going to be on their toes moving forward.
And a team that underperformed in this bracket, South Dakota State. Many people had them beating Ohio State. They were right there with a minute left, but then David Jenkins Jr. to the foul line, Kelly Bates Diop with a minute left to turn it into a 4-point play. I think that game just kind of blew wide open. But I think in that matter, I think under a minute left, the refs got to swallow their whistles and just let them play. Let the players decide the game. Don't make the whistles decide the game.
Well, it wasn't the year for the Summit League, but it is still the year for all the teams that are left in the bracket, and we are going to be coming back with more of the NCAA tournament right after this.
Welcome back, everybody, and now we're going to talk about the East region, where it was the least chaotic region. And Jay, there's only one chaos in that bracket, and that was Marshall beating Wichita State. And I actually thought Wichita State was going to be able to make a run a little bit there, but that came down almost to the end, like the South Dakota State, like a lot of these games have, in Loyola Chicago Miami game. But what do you make of this region with Villanova, West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Purdue all advancing?
Well, I think this is more the traditional way of thinking that the NCAA tournament's going to come out, that you've got these big teams that sort of battle past some early conflict and get into these big matchups later on. It's really what a lot of people are looking for, is that they want to see all the best teams in the nation really go head-to-head, and this is kind of the region for that. You've got the big dog and a heavy favorite to win the whole thing in Villanova, and they're still sitting there with other very good teams as well. Purdue is one of the bigger surprises coming out of the Big Ten. They had lost Caleb Swanigan and a couple other key players coming into this year, but they have outperformed people's expectations, and instead of being a team that faced potential upset, it became a team that thrived under pressure. So with still the 1 and the 2 seed remaining, you've got a very scrappy West Virginia team, which is built on experience and defense, as well as a Texas Tech team that has also turned some heads with their resiliency. So this is kind of the region that has the big matchups moving forward, and I think this is why it's going to be one of the most fun regions to watch early on in this weekend.
So Villanova, you mentioned it, Villanova, favorite to win the tournament. West Virginia, scrappy. Purdue, they lost their big man, Isaac Haas, fracture double. Purdue College of Engineering, they're trying to manufacture a brace so he can play, because the brace that he was going to use, NCAA didn't approve of. And then Texas Tech, Keenan Evans, they turned some heads in the Big 12 along with West Virginia, but they do that every year. Texas Tech was kind of a big surprise, first year under a new coach. So looking at each matchup, Villanova and West Virginia, do you think Villanova can handle the pressure that West Virginia puts on, being from the Big East, that they didn't really face all that pressure that West Virginia put on their opponents each game throughout the season?
I think it's going to be a tougher matchup than most people think it will be. West Virginia has shut down some very good teams this year. When they played Oklahoma early in this year, back when Oklahoma was the big thing, they completely shut down Trae Young. They completely exposed all of his weaknesses, and I think Jalen Brunson is going to face some of those same issues. They've got really good, experienced senior defenders that they're going to be throwing at these teams. But I do think that Villanova, they've been in it these past couple of years. They've made it all the way to the final championship. They've won within the past couple of years. I think Villanova has the experience to get past a team like West Virginia, and I think where they maybe would run into some problems would be with a team like Texas Tech, who they're maybe not as familiar with, maybe don't have as strong of a game plan against. But I think this first matchup against West Virginia is going to definitely be in Villanova's favor.
So now, and I kind of agree with you, I think it's going to be in Villanova's favor, but I think that scrappy West Virginia team, maybe they limit Villanova, who shoots 47% of its shots, 53% of its shots from 3. If they go cold, it could be all over, because, I mean, you got Sabaj Konate at the blocking at the rim for West Virginia, and he's proven to be pretty good this year. But I think Villanova wins in a close one, but I would not be surprised if West Virginia came out on top and moved on to the Elite Eight for the first time in, I don't know, I can't even think how long since they last played. But now looking at Purdue, Texas Tech, Purdue's got a big man inside. Does the loss of Isaac Haas affect them and their ability and their defense with kind of being like scrappy like West Virginia? They're going after all these steals, but do they win? Do they move on, or does Texas Tech get the better of them?
I think the injury definitely plays huge into Purdue. It's a big part of that team's identity. I think Texas Tech is going to come out with a lot of firepower, and I don't think Purdue is going to be able to keep up. Even if Haas is playing, Texas Tech has been one of the offensive powerhouses in this tournament that has been consistent with their offensive production. I think that continues into this game, and it's not going to be until they face Villanova that they really face some problems.
I mean, I think Purdue and the inside, I think you're right. They're going to face some problems with Texas Tech and their three-point shooting, and they've been very consistent, but Purdue's been in that Sweet 16 before. They know what it takes to win. They won the Sweet 16 last year. They got blown out by Kansas. I think you're right. I think Texas Tech will move on, but I don't even think you should consider that an upset of 3-2. But Texas Tech has got some good players. They knocked off Kansas in Lawrence this year, so they got some good quality wins. But I think Purdue, moves on from that region to face Villanova in the Elite Eight.
Well, we'll have to see when the games come up this weekend. But next, we'll be wrapping up our coverage of the NCAA tournament with X's and O's, brought to you by Herd and Horns. Stay with us.
Welcome back, everybody, for our final segment of this week's X's and O's, talking about the Midwest region, where the number 1 seed Kansas will face 5-seeded Clemson, and number 11 Syracuse will face the number 2 seed Duke for a right to go to the Elite Eight. Jay, talking about that Kansas-Clemson matchup, what meets the eye right away, and who do you think's come down to that matchup right there?
I really think that Kansas has to be aware of all the other number 1 seeds that have gone down, as everyone is. And Kansas, like I was talking about with Gonzaga, is a team that's really been used to disappointment. They've been going down early year after year after year lately, and I think that's definitely going to be on their minds. I think the matchup that everyone really wants to see is going to be Kansas-Duke in this region. Will it happen? It's really hard to tell at this point, but we'll get to that a little later with my predictions. But in terms of Kansas-Clemson, I think Clemson's a really sort of emerging team in terms of the NCAA, but I don't think they're established. Kansas has a long history of winning the Big 12, a long history of winning in NCAA basketball, and it's a historic program that is going to be, they've got so much experience coming to this game that a new Clemson team that's just sort of beginning to really build momentum as an NCAA powerhouse, I think Kansas is going to take it this year. But of course, with all the unpredictability of the NCAA tournament, you never know. But my initial hunch is that Kansas is going to, with how they build their team on just sort of veteran leadership and veteran power, I think Kansas is going to be able to get past Clemson at least.
Well, looking online, reading all these ESPN articles and everything like that, Clemson, they're saying they should reseeding the Sweet 16 teams, they'd be a number 1 seed. I don't buy it. I don't think so. They're like a mini. People are saying they're like a little mini Virginia. Mm-hmm. Like coming up, building themselves on defense, priding themselves. They beat Duke at home. They beat North Carolina. They beat all these tough teams. But yeah, you're right. Kansas, being a big Kansas fan, I am. The big guy inside, Udoka Azubuike. Name's really hard to pronounce. I probably pronounced that wrong.
That was pretty close, yeah.
Devontae Graham, senior leader. Malik Newman, he transferred to Mississippi State, sat out last year, but You're right. I think Kansas, the leadership and the experience of that team and the disappointment, I think that's going to fuel this team. And I think Malik Newman and LeGerald Dick are going to be the X factors, and they're going to push them over the hump to defeat Clemson, where Kansas is crashing in an all ACC party. But now we'll move on to the next matchup. And we got two 2-3 zones, and Syracuse and Duke with Marvin Bagley, potential player of the year. What stands out to you about this matchup?
I think the thing that's going to be interesting to watch here is that Duke is such a young team, not in terms of the program, completely opposite to the Kansas game we're talking about. Duke is a completely young team in that they've got so many freshmen in that starting lineup. They've got Bagley, as you mentioned, they've got Gary Trent Jr. They're relying heavily on freshmen and Grayson Allen sort of as the senior leader, whereas Syracuse is more of the traditional program with sort of a mix of experience levels within that starting lineup, with Jim Boeheim sort of taking this 11 seed and propelling them through with just sheer basketball knowledge and strategy. And I think this is the game that the upset could potentially be ripe and ready to be taken. Marvin Bagley's a great player. He's going to be in the top 3 of the NBA draft for sure, but he's also surrounded by a bunch of other one-and-done players who are going to be right up there with him in that NBA draft. And I don't think that this team is as built for the long run of an NCAA tournament as Syracuse has been, because Boeheim knows that he can only recruit so well with the program that Syracuse has, with sort of the trouble they had at around the 2010s in terms of the sanctions against them and whatnot. Now they're coming back. They've had a very impressive run as the last team out, but I definitely think that Syracuse is going to have the game plan to sort of play off of that inexperience for Duke. Duke has a lot of individually very talented players. I think Syracuse is going to come in as the more cohesive unit and take out Duke. Like I said, everyone wants to see a Kansas-Duke matchup, but I think one of them is going to end up losing, and I think it's going to be Duke.
I mean, I think either way you look at it, 2 Hall of Fame coaches, Syracuse, Jim Boeheim and Mike Krzyzewski, 2 Hall of Fame great coaches going at it. The 2-3 zone, Grayson Allen, a little history of him tripping the butt check, as many people call it. I think he got called for a flagrant 1 in the ACC tournament, but I think Duke and the inexperience, due to them losing to Boston College by 20 points early on in the year at Boston College, I think Syracuse moves on and sets up a rematch of early on in the season where Kansas and Syracuse played. But it's not going to surprise me to see 2 blue bloods go at it. But I think with Syracuse beating Michigan State, I think they have all the confidence in the world. They're playing with house money, basically. They did that a few years ago when they made the Final Four, but who knows? I think it's going to be Kansas, and I hope it's Syracuse, but I want to see Duke because my friends, they all are big Duke rooting fans, so I think it's going to be Kansas and Duke, and Kansas is going to ship on to the Final Four for the first time since 2011.
And speaking about the Final Four, we're going to move out of sort of looking at region by region and look at the big picture for the final part of the NCAA tournament. Looking at what's left now, of course, everyone loves to do the NCAA tournament brackets when you don't know what the heck's going to happen. Now that things have sort of narrowed down, we've seen these teams play, and we're down to the Sweet 16. Who do you think is going to be your Final Four?
Oh, man, that top region, that Virginia region is so tough. So I'll do that one last. I think going down to the bottom region, I think it's going to be Gonzaga that moves on to the Final Four out of the West. Just due to jet lag, they don't got to travel very far, but it would not shock me to see Michigan move on. I think out of the top bracket or Villanova, I believe that's the East region, I think it's going to be either Villanova or Purdue coming out of there. I have Purdue coming out in my bracket, and I think Purdue's going to move on to face Kansas. I don't think it matters who they're going to play. They're sick of the disappointment. Last 2 years, they lost the Elite Eight. They want to get back to that Final Four. And San Antonio, 10 years ago, that's where Mario Chalmers hit the shot to send it into overtime and bring Kansas their first titles since 1988. And I think out of the South region, I think it's going to be Kentucky, but I would not be shocked to see Loyola Chicago. So in my Final Four, I have Kentucky, Gonzaga, Villanova, and Kansas going on, and I have Kansas as my national champion. Then they'll be beating Kentucky to see the 2 blue bloods square off, and it's going to be a different this time around when Kentucky beat them last time.
And I have to say, in terms of my bracket, it would be pretty close to what you're saying, so I'll change it up just to make things a little interesting. I'm going to start with saying that I don't trust Kansas. They've been blowing it lately. They've been blowing it real hard lately. So I'm going to say Duke comes out of that region. I think they're going to get past Syracuse, and they're going to ride on their dynamic young talent. So I think Duke is going to surprise people and come out of that region. I agree with you on Gonzaga. I agree with you on Villanova. I have Villanova winning the whole thing. That was my prediction at the beginning of the NCAA tournament. I'm going to stick with it because that makes me look better. So I'm going to have Villanova, Gonzaga, and Duke, and then I guess Kentucky because who knows? I mean, Loyola's got some magic going on, but how much do they really have?
It wouldn't shock me to see Kansas State beat Kentucky and then Kansas State play Loyola for a 9-11 because there's never been a 9 seed to win the national championship.
Well, that would be interesting if we had a 9/11 matchup and Texas A&M went all the way and George W. Bush was right with his bracket. Wouldn't that be great?
That would be great.
But that's all we have for you today with X's and O's broadcasting to you live and sponsored by Herd and Horns. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.